Welcome back to episode 86 of Warrior's Den with the lead instructor or head instructor of Krav Maga Israel, Ron Engelman. But before I get into Ron's background, let's remind all our listeners that this podcast is brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions since 2013. So if you like the podcast or you want to support us, you can do a few things. Now, the free things that you can do that are super easy is you can follow us on Instagram at Urban Tactics Krav Maga, Facebook at Urban Tactics Krav Maga, and of course, you can check out us on Twitter at Urban Tactics KM, though it's not any original content there, and Twitter. You can also check out our blog. I or others make posts usually on a weekly basis on a variety of topics, from self-defense to other things related to it. You can check it out at UTKMblog.com. And if you really want to support us, you can click on the Support Us tab, and you can donate some money to us to help us keep this content coming. You don't have to, of course. It's always much appreciated. There is a option there. But if you want a little bit of something for your money, you can go to UTKMU.com. That's separate from the blog, because the blog is UTKMblog.com. UTKMU.com, and you can check out the curriculum as we teach it. So all it is how we teach the curriculum in order and in a structured format. Whether you're an instructor in another organization and just want to see how we do it, or you are away from your home school and want to see what we do and learn, or just broaden your horizons, you can check out either a monthly or annual subscription. There are beginner options and novice options. The advanced curriculum isn't quite ready yet, but it will be there as well, right? Obviously, Krav Maga needs to be learned in person, but for many people, retaining information can be difficult, so that is where online comes in. So you have UTKMU.com, you can sign up there, and it is no more expensive than a couple coffees a month. So there is that. Now, I don't know which URL I'm going to put out yet. I am going to have a online shop, where soon I'm working on it, where you can buy our UTKM gear. I'm going to start with our basic stuff that our students wear. We did a redesign, so we're super excited about that. But we're going to start putting out a variety of clothing options and fight gear. So be aware that is coming. I don't know which URL I'm going to put out for that yet, so I'm not going to give it to you. Just be aware, if you like our logo and you like our motto and you like all that stuff, we will be having clothing in the future for purchase anywhere in the world, because it's easy to ship clothing, though expensive to ship out of Canada. We'll see. So there is that. And if you are in town in Metro Vancouver, in British Columbia, Canada, you can train with us directly at urbantacticskm.com. That's our primary website, and you can get the contact information for us, and you can check out our schedule. If you're training from out of town, please send us an email, especially if you have a background in Krav Maga, so we can do an assessment and see how you are, if you want to do the novice classes. But you have to have a background in Krav Maga before I would allow that. Otherwise, if you're new, sign up for a free trial class, urbantacticskm.com. We are the top Krav Maga school in Metro Vancouver, so check us out. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, and don't forget, I always forget, don't forget, if you're in Canada and want to have a firearm, you must get your possession and acquisition license. To do that, you have to take what's called a course, a training course, the Canadian Firearms Safety Course and Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course. We do offer that. There is a course coming up this month in July, and there'll be courses every 2 months. So check that out if you want to get your Canadian firearms license, so you can have firearms in Canada. And if you have any questions about that, you can check out on the urbantacticskm.com website. Okay, that's it. So, Ron Engelman, let's read what it says on their website, KravMagaIsrael.com. So, he's been in a military career which spans across 20 years. Ron has trained hundreds of combat soldiers in Krav Maga. Setting himself apart from other Krav Maga trainers in the IDF, Ron's experience goes beyond the role of a trainer. He has led soldiers in combat, participating in dozens of counterterrorism operations deep within enemy territory, and he fought in the Second Lebanese War, earning the rank of Master Sergeant. Ron trains Krav Maga instructors from around the world and has certified instructors in Israel, US, Europe, Australia, and Asia. So he is one of the top instructors in Israel. You can check out Ron on Instagram, either at his personal persona one, Ron Engelman on Instagram, or the krav.maga.israel one, which is Krav Maga Israel's Instagram. So you can check him out there. And Ron, I believe, was originally from the US, moved to Israel, and then spent university in Australia because one of his parents was from there. But he explains all that details in the podcast, and you can check it out. So here, enough rambling on my part. Here is this episode. Krav Maga is not just a self-defense system. It is a way of life. Warriors Den is a podcast for Kravists, fighters, martial artists, warriors, politicians, and general citizens. Consider this. The society that separates scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Lucidity. Your host, Jonathan Fader, talks to guests in an open and uncensored format about their fights, their philosophies, and their lives. No topic is taboo, and the conversation may start in one place and end in another. As the quote suggests, you cannot separate the warrior from the politics and the world around them, as a true warrior must be a student in all forms of art and science.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
Welcome back. I am here with head instructor Ron Engelman of Krav Maga Israel. How are you today?
Doing pretty good.
Awesome. So let's just start with how did life bring you to Krav Maga and martial arts?
Well, I've been doing Krav Maga ever since I was a little kid growing up in Israel. Truth is, actually, I spent a couple of years in the United States in San Diego when I was young. And I'd been doing various other forms of martial arts since I was about 4 or 6 years old. And Krav Maga just started in the United States. And my mom said, okay, I was probably 10 at the time. She said, I'd like you to do Krav Maga. This is new Israeli system that just started teaching in America. I want you to try it out. And I said, Bruce Lee doesn't do Krav Maga. Van Damme doesn't do Krav Maga.
Yeah.
I don't want to do Krav Maga. But if you know anything about Jewish mothers, it should come no surprise that I started doing Krav Maga. So I've been doing it since I was about Krav Maga specifically since I was 10 years old. A couple of years after that, we moved back to Israel, and I was fortunate enough to be living right next door to Netanya. So I had the place in Israel where Krav Maga was founded. Imi was sitting in Netanya. That's where he had his first civilian gyms, and all of his, highest ranking instructors were over there. So I had the good fortune from a very young age to be training with a lot of, the biggest names of Krav Maga at the time. And, one thing rolled on to the next. I joined into the Israeli army. It was very important for me. I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be a combat soldier. And I passed selections to go into there, but I guess Krav Maga always followed me because during the second Intifada, when there were a lot of close quarter combat scenarios, Krav Maga started playing a more and more prominent role in the military. And the Israeli army had an idea where they wanted the Krav Maga instructors that were training the combat soldiers to be combat soldiers themselves. Because what they found was when they were sending these non-combat soldiers who were professional instructors, that means all they did was teach. One, the soldiers didn't necessarily take them seriously because there's a divide, I guess, between who serves in combat, the war fighters, and the guys, we call them in Israel jobnikim, which it's kind of a derogatory term for people who, the army is like a job. It's like a 9 to 5. They go home every day to their, to their parents. So there's kind of that divide for combat soldiers to take non-combat soldiers seriously, but there's also this other part of it of, in order to be able to understand the operational environment and the requirements of the soldiers and to adapt it for the training, it made a lot of sense that the people who were teaching it was Krav Maga were combat soldiers who, first and foremost, who were also Krav Maga instructors. So having been doing Krav Maga since I was a little kid, I was the obvious choice. I got sent by my commanders to complete the Krav Maga instructors course, and I came back to serve in my unit as a sergeant, but also as the Krav Maga instructor for the unit.
What unit were you in?
Things changed a little bit since the 20 years that I was in full-time service. It's not. I'm still actively serving in reserves, but it was the 50th Airborne Infantry Brigade of the Nahal. So we, back then, it was when just the Second Intifada was breaking out. We saw a lot of combat.
Okay, yeah. When I was there, I served in Givati in 2009 to 11, so it was actually pretty quiet time. So you got all the fun, exciting times.
Well, it was a very interesting time to be in the military, because our training, people always say that the army trains to fight the last war, and there's certainly some truth to that. The war that just passed, not the future war, but the one that we just had. So our training as airborne infantry was to fight conventional warfare. We were training to fight the Syrian commandos in the Golan Heights. But then when the Second Intifada broke out, we found ourselves fighting Hamas inside urban environments with civilians around, and it was nothing like the conventional warfare that we've been trained for. So we had to make a very, very quick adaptation and understand that the missions we were going on were nothing like what the army had been preparing. And it was a very interesting time because, again, the promise of Krav Maga came out. Krav Maga has always been important for the army, but it's certainly more important in the type of CQB environments we were facing. And also I guess Israel's always on the forefront, fortunately, or more likely unfortunately, of battle, because I was nearing the end of my service. I was actually in the army, enlisted during 9/11, and a bit before the United States were getting geared to go into Iraq at the time. We started seeing more and more specialists and different soldiers from the United States all of a sudden randomly popping up on our bases and having in-depth chats with the commanders. So what was happening was the Americans, before going to Iraq, they understood that they were going to fight a war like hadn't been fought, and the Israelis, we'd already had some years experience in fighting those type of wars, as we're familiar with today in Afghanistan and Iraq and all over the world. So we kind of learned the job on the fly, and other militaries around the world were able to come in and to learn from our experience.
Yeah, that's something I always, I always try to explain to people, because in North America, everyone has their idea of the military is what they see in the movies a lot of the time. It's usually a representation of the Marines. And then I'll tell them my experience in the IDF, and they're always taken aback about, because for me, it was it was very tough, but it's like a casual, compared to like the super rigid, structured, nonstop, like craziness of the Americans. And I always say it's, they don't have time to mess around with the nonsense. And it's duct tape and shoelaces. And you just sort of figure stuff out and go and you find solutions to problems that you wouldn't otherwise, because you're not terrified about the chain of command and the politics. You just kind of, as long as it's moral and ethical, hey, figure out a way, right? People are often shocked by that.
Yeah, it's a very different military environment. First of all, it's a much smaller army. In Israel, we've got our enemies on a doorstep. Like, some of the places where I was serving, you'd be in a firefight, and in the middle of of the hottest areas, and then you get on an APC, an armored vehicle. It drives you down to the nearest base. You hop on a bus, and within 45 minutes, you're home.
Yeah.
Eating lunch with mom. And I don't live in the territories, right? I live in the middle of Israel, near the city of Netanya, which is like half an hour from Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
So our enemies and the people who want to kill us are right on our doorstep, and it's very real, and it's very, I guess, different. I'm not saying it's any more or less, just different from when you prepare and you fly with your unit overseas. It's very different from serving overseas, where everything is on our doorstep.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely a interesting experience. It's like here, because I'm in Canada, the Canadian military, most of it is reserves, and it's sort of like that where if they want to serve, they do their basic training and all that, and they can even do it over a course of multiple weekends, which as a taxpayer I hate because they're flying all the way back and forth nonstop, or they can do it in a one chunk, and then after that they're supposed to go like once a week to the local base, and then if they want to do other stuff, they can. Because our military is very small in Canada compared to even Israel. Probably 5,000 standing combat troops at any given time, most of which are probably reserves. My numbers might be a little out, but here the concept of military is like it's not a thing for most people. And if you see,
you guys are very fortunate. You got some very powerful neighbors
yeah,
that have got your back.
I'm
The
not
one
sure
thing,
anymore, but
I don't
yeah,
know,
that's
but the one thing about Israel is that we've always done our own fighting, and that's people bag on about the relations that Israel has with the United States and so on, but not a single American soldier has ever had to step foot. And like the Americans fought in and still have bases where they're actively serving and protecting in Korea, in Germany, in various parts of Europe, where in Israel we hold our own.
yeah,
We don't
yeah.
need military support. We do our own fighting. We do our own dying, unfortunately, and that's just the way it always has been. We rely on ourselves. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I remember because I was on Mitkan Adam for a while, and they do have foreign soldiers there, usually exchange of ideas and training, right? And then you guys are like, you can wear your uniforms and have your guns on base. As soon as you step off base, you're in civilian clothes. You're not allowed to do anything. It's probably quite shocking for some of those American guys that just can't handle. They're not in charge anymore. It was pretty funny for me because never thought I would see that. So, Krav Maga in the military. How much of your time do you teach Krav Maga in the military versus civilian, and how does that shift for you? That sort of difference in teaching.
Um, it really depends. Like, so most of my work nowadays is civilian. I'm still
Hmm.
actively serving. I'm actually just about this year. I'm supposed to. I turn 40. That should be the end of my reserve training, but I'll probably stay on as a volunteer and
Yeah.
continue serving in my unit. Um, a typical, unit like mine, we might do maybe. There is no. That's the thing with Israel. There is no typical. On paper, we're supposed to do about 3 to 4 weeks a year of either training or active service. Usually, I guess on paper really has no meaning because there's no sort of like standard. We might, we're supposed to only be deployed so often, but if there's a round with Gaza or if there's a second Lebanese war, whatever is happening, then we just get called. So
Yeah.
as a reserve soldier, you're on call and you get called up a lot. As part of that, like first and foremost, I'm an infantry soldier and I'm a commander. I'm a war fighter. That's what I do. I also teach Krav Maga to my unit, and that makes me quite unique because generally you're either a professional teacher or you're a combat soldier. Because my unit goes to some interesting places, then Krav Maga is quite up there in our skill set. So I do quite a bit of teaching over there too. Especially if we're going to some specific hot zones, we have intel and stuff, and we have had soldiers who've been attacked, who've been stabbed, and the Krav Maga certainly certainly plays an important role. It's quite unique as an instructor. I don't think you get that anywhere, where you train your practitioners, in this case, the soldiers, and then you deploy with them and you get to see the skill set and that you're training. Sometimes you even get to see it applied in real life. Whereas civilian conflict, can you imagine of training one of your students in a civilian Krav Maga school and then going out with him, to a really, really dangerous neighborhood, and then watching him get attacked? That just doesn't happen. It's really enabled me to hone in on one of, I think, the most important skill sets that are there in Krav Maga. Maybe back to what you said of weeding away everything that's not important and really focusing on what's the one thing that I need to be delivering here.
Yeah.
Because often, I might get, some places I get 20 minutes with the soldiers, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's ridiculous. Sometimes I'll get a group of soldiers and they're like, okay, well, you have 20 minutes to do Krav Maga session, and after that they're going to go on mission, and there's a very good likelihood that somebody's going to stab them.
Yeah.
So what are you going to teach somebody in 20 minutes? How are you going to spend your time? And that's something that Krav Maga is well equipped to handle. As opposed to, I'm very fond. I love boxing. I love jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I do all these sports. And, if somebody came to you and said, look, you have 20 minutes to teach somebody jiu-jitsu, you have 20 minutes to teach somebody boxing, like, you'd laugh at them. What do you teach? There's no point of 20 minutes of boxing. There really isn't. But there is a point of 20 minutes of Krav Maga. It's not ideal. I'm not saying you should go out there and that's what you should do, only 20 minutes of Krav Maga. But if it's a life or death situation, there's certainly some things I can show you within 20 minutes that could very likely save your life.
Yeah. Because on that note, it's often when, let's say, an instructor in Israel comes in with the attitude, because they always rush do, and then goes to civilian school. I've found if they don't really understand what they're doing, or if they don't have a traditional martial arts background, they sort of take that attitude to their civilian schools, and they forget that you're training people who probably aren't as physically capable as the soldiers are, and you need that year development time. And I'm wondering, at least for sure in North America, I don't know about Europe. I'm not sure it's the case in Europe, where it's part of the reason it's led to sort of Krav Maga's, quote, downfall in North America, because of the quality of development. Because I can just teach you in 20 minutes. And then they don't realize, because in the military, I'm getting, even infantry, I'm probably getting the top 10% of physically capable humans versus civilians. It's like this person can barely know their left from their right. And if you get an instructor who's really I can teach Krav Maga in 20 minutes, and then tries to run a civilian school, I've seen it go quite poorly. What do you think about sort of that dichotomy of civilian military?
100%. Being a military Krav Maga instructor does not qualify you to teach civilian Krav Maga. Quite literally so, in fact, because the military Krav Maga certification that I went through, that anybody who's a Krav Maga instructor in the soldier, doesn't qualify. You cannot teach Krav Maga to civilians in Israel with that certification. But besides let's say the bureaucracy of it, there's good reason, because okay, let's start with the most of the, and I'm now not talking about reserves. I'm talking about what you would have probably experienced, which is full-time serving soldiers, compulsory service, usually between 18 and 21. So you got to understand that the instructor themselves is also probably a 19, 20-year-old, right, with very limited life experience at that point. Also very limited training experience, because look, it's great to be, as somebody who's been training Krav Maga since I was a very young child, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the same skill set. Like, yes, you learn the moves, but because you learned Krav Maga as a child doesn't necessarily, and let's say you left it there, doesn't necessarily give you the skill sets to train Krav Maga at an adult. So basically what I'm trying to say is that these 19-year-old Krav Maga instructors, not to bag them out because they do an important role, but their skill set are limited, and that's perfectly fine. because the amount of information that's passed on is also fairly limited, depending on who you're training with. And of course, the more elite units have more experienced Krav Maga instructors. Some of the very elite units, they have Krav Maga instructors who are professional. That means that they've finished their full-time service. They're quite older, and they've signed on to be long-term Krav Maga instructors for that unit. But the majority of Krav Maga instructors, they're kids. They can teach you how to hit somebody with the butt of a rifle. They can teach you how to block against a knife with your rifle, and a few basic skills, and that's all they need to do. That's not enough. Then, if you're teaching civilians, also the mission and the goal is different. You talked about the clientele that walks in. So if I'm teaching soldiers, especially combat soldiers, they're fit guys and girls who have made it their mission to serve in these units that are quite difficult to, if not to get into, then to stay into, from physical aspects and mental aspects. So these are the war fighters, right? They're not the majority of the army. They're not the majority of the population. So you're right in that, but it goes on beyond there, because I also have a very limited of time as instructor to train them, right? Because there's a lot of other very important skill sets that they're learning while they're going through their training. They need to learn how to shoot. They need to learn how to orienteer. They need to learn how to do tactical exercise. There's so much of a skill set that's learned as soldiers, and the Krav Maga is a part of it. I'd even say a small part of it, an important part of it, but it's not the main part of it. And I might get, with a unit, let's say the Givati brigade, like you served with 6 months of basic training plus advanced infantry training. I believe it was still there at your time.
Yeah.
Krav Maga sessions, you might get, if you're lucky, you might get maybe 2 to 4 hours a week, if that. Now, and you'll do that for a period of 4 to 6, probably less.
Yeah.
Okay. A civilian who's coming to Krav Maga school, yes, on the one side, I want to give them practical experiences right away, but the goal is for them to be able to keep on training for 5-10 years, maybe take it as a lifelong pursuit and become instructors themselves, right? So I need to have a much bigger field of knowledge over there as a civilian instructor. I also need to have good empathy, let's say, because at the end of the day, the civilian student is a paying customer. They're coming in because they see value and they want to get out of that. The soldier is not necessarily there because they want to be there. Maybe they don't even understand the need of that. They go, why do I need to learn Krav Maga? I've got this M4 or Tavor rifle. Like, they're not necessarily easy customers to deal with, and they have zero tolerance for bullshit. They don't care who you are. They didn't seek you out. They don't know, how many stripes you have on your black belt. They couldn't care less. It's all about, what can you teach me right now, and why should I even listen? I've already had a pretty tiring week of training, right? So it's a very different mentality, and a good military Krav Maga instructor doesn't necessarily make a good civilian instructor, and vice versa. A good civilian Krav Maga instructor doesn't make necessarily a good military instructor. They're two complete different skill sets.
When I was there, so I always forget, it's been so long. The army has its own ulpan for Olim, and I did maybe 4 or 5 Krav Maga sessions there, and then when I got into Givati, I did another 4 or 5 Krav Maga sessions there. I did not actually learn anything new because I'd been doing Krav Maga for about a year and a bit before I came, just to prepare. But hilariously, the Krav instructor at the Ulpan was way harder. He was doing the full hour and a half, 45 minutes brutal, then the technique like you guys often do. And then in the combat, they're like, we got half an hour. Let's do some stuff. I always found that quite comical, and it really woke up to the myth, at least in North America, they have, you're an Israeli combat soldier, you must be able to rip people's heads off, with your bare hands. No.
It's not true for any military, right? It's this maybe thing that's been. I've had my fair share of experience working with different military units from around the world in Israel, and also throughout my teaching, in various different countries, and maybe Steven Seagal sold it to us that every Navy SEAL is expert in hand-to-hand combat,
Yeah.
but that's certainly not true. Neither is it necessary. They need some very, very basic skills, but like if you get to a point where you have to use hand-to-hand combat, you failed somewhere along the way. And also the type of fighting you do hand-to-hand is very different because you're there with a team. It never happens that you're one-on-one for fight to the death against the big boss or something like that. So like we see in the movies. So I'd get often commandos from different, like tough boys that they've been to Afghanistan, they've been to Iraq, like they've seen combat. And then when you go into Krav Maga, you're like, geez, this person can't throw a punch to save their life.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, it's not great. Ideally, you'd want a foundation level of training, and that's of course where we come in. But by no means do they need to be the equivalent of Krav Maga black belts or Jiu-Jitsu black belts or anything of the such. So yeah, it's been sold that everybody in the Israeli army is a bloody commando, but first of all, war fighters in any army make a very small percentage of the soldiers, and even among the war fighters, the need for proficiency in hand-to-hand combat, there needs to be proficiency. They do not need to be experts.
Yeah, for sure. Now, how did Australia fit into your life plan? Because you were over there for a while and teaching Krav Maga. How does that fit in?
So my dad was originally from Australia. Actually, he was actually born in Czechoslovakia after the war. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. After the war, they got married and they had my dad. And he was only about a month old when they left Czechoslovakia and they moved to Australia. The communists were coming in. The Iron Curtain was coming down, and they fled. And their younger brothers and sisters who already survived the war had already immigrated to Australia, and they joined them over there. So my dad grew up in Australia. And around the time of the 6-Day War, he came to Israel the 6-Day War, for anybody who's not versed in history, it was pretty clear that was the end of Israel. Everybody around, all the country, there was no way that this tiny new country was going to survive a fight against all of the Arab nations around, against Jordan, against Egypt, against Syria, against Lebanon, against Iraq. There was no way that Israel was going to survive this. So a lot of people, like my dad, they had family in Israel, and they said, I'm not going to let this country be overrun. I'm going to go and join in the fight. So my dad immigrated to Israel. He ended up joining the army. He became an officer, and that's where I was born. But I've got cousins and I've got grandparents, and all my dad's side is from Australia. I've got Australian citizenship. As a kid, I used to visit Australia quite often because my grandparents were over there. So I've always had a very strong connection to Australia. And for me, it was always clear that the moment I finished my military service, when it came time to study, I wanted to do it in Australia because I wanted to get to know this country that I felt was part of my heritage, I felt also Australian very much. So that's how I arrived in Australia. I went there to study at university. I completed a degree in psychology. Krav Maga has always followed me everywhere I go. So when I was a student, I started teaching Krav Maga. And later, after quite a few years of doing that, I set up I opened up my own facility over there. Some of my students became instructors themselves, and so on. And it became this, it became a powerhouse of its own. And nowadays, it's a school that's still run by my students and some of the students of my students. And it's a beautiful, beautiful gym that runs over there. So I'm still there quite often. I go there a couple of times a year before COVID hits to train the instructors, to oversee everything that happens over there. So that's my connection to Australia and to the Krav Maga Defense Institute, which is the name of the school that I established while I was living there.
Yeah, because I think that's the internet. I think that's the first when I first saw you on the internet. It was something to do with Australia, and then I started seeing you post more in Israel. I'm like, oh, okay, he's in both. It was interesting though that you said you have a degree in psychology. Like I didn't finish my full degree because I can't stand universities now, but I got my associates. But I'm huge into psychology and mental aspects. And I have found it has helped my ability to teach Krav Maga extensively by really understanding how the body works. So Krav Maga principle of work off the body's natural reactions. And I find a lot of Krav Maga instructors, they say that and they teach that, but they don't really understand that. So when I delved into the psychology and you start understanding, oh, it really works because I think it's enriched my teaching over the years. Have you found the same thing as well?
100%, 100%. I find this psychological aspect to be absolutely fascinating. I think to be a good Krav Maga instructor, first of all, I would say you got to have a lot of empathy, because you got to, like, there are two ways of teaching it. One is you can just, some instructors, and that's normally the beginning phases. An inexperienced teacher will come in, they'll teach what they want to teach, they have the techniques, and they pass it on, and they teach for them. They teach what they want to teach. There's another way of going at it, of seeing where the student is at and really getting into their head and seeing what they need from you right now. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? What tricks are their mind playing on them when you take them into hard places and helping them overcome that? That's what I call a coach. Somebody who can, who has, they're not just there to pass on the material, but they're really there for you, and they can get into your head. That's one aspect of it, of the teaching side of it. And I think that's true for anything, not just a Krav Maga instructor. But on specifically for Krav Maga instructor, you need to understand violence, not just the mechanics of it, because that's what we teach. We teach, if somebody comes, this is how you do a block, this is how you punch, this is why you should do it, this is the most effective way, and these are the reasons why. These are the mechanics of Krav Maga. But they're only a very small part of protecting yourself and protecting your loved ones. And you need to understand the full scope of what violence is, where you can meet it, what type of people will likely be there to attack you, what are their motivations, so that you can avoid, so that you can de-escalate. And too often that's neglected. People just focus on, the physical aspects of Krav Maga, which are important. You can't do away with them, but they don't exist in a vacuum. And if you don't teach that as well, then there's no difference between Krav Maga and MMA and boxing, because all you're doing is really, you're teaching, how would I say? You're teaching a syllabus. You're teaching a set of techniques or moves, and far too often you're setting people up for like one-on-one bouts, right? And that's not what Krav Maga is designed for. Krav Maga is like boxing is about two guys, same weight class, same skill set. They're going to meet in the ring under the same set of rules where both of them are ready, both of them are prepared for that, and then we'll see whose skill set surpasses. Krav Maga doesn't care about any of that. Krav Maga is about me as instructor. I need to teach a 45-kilo woman, whatever that is in pounds, to be able to survive. Somebody wants to attack her for sexual assault in a parking lot, right?
Yeah.
And it's a whole different kettle of fish. And if the only answer you have to that, well, in Krav Maga, we kick to the balls or we eye gouge, where nothing's that, you're really not, you're missing the whole point of it.
Yeah.
The whole point of it starts in de-escalation. Actually, I just recently recorded a podcast with Professor Bill von Hippel, who's, I had the good fortune of being a student of his while I was at university. His specialization is evolutionary social psychology. So he approaches from an evolutionary perspective, from the perspective of evolution, to understand what our reactions are. Why are we likely to behave when under threat like this? And why? And when we understand the why, we can start to work with it. We understand that, okay, if somebody challenges a guy in a bar who's 16 to 30 years old, what's likely going to be their instincts, and what's going to be the impulses, and where do they come from? Or, if there's somebody who's targeted another woman for sexual assault, right? what's happening in the attacker's mind? What are they looking for? What are the type of things that are going to deter them? How did they choose their potential targets? Now, these are things that we spend like anybody dealing in the self-defense aspect has some idea, spent some time thinking about these things. But if you really want to deep dive and you really want to understand it, the answer is in evolution. Evolution is giving us the reactions. You spoke about, rightfully so, that Krav Maga is built on instincts and natural reactions. Okay? And often people say, well, our ancestors had these instincts of, let's say, putting our hands up like so if somebody comes to attack us, and therefore our ancestors who had these instincts, they were more likely to survive. But you can go much deeper than that, and also you can go deeper into the attacker. And if you start to understand what are things that are going to get the attackers to respond, not just physically, but the whole realm of things, that can really help. So Professor Bill von Hippel, he was also on the Joe Rogan podcast a couple of years ago. He's a brilliant guy. And the evolution side of it is, I find it just fascinating.
Yeah. I've been figuring out how to explain the fight and flight and freeze mechanisms, as well as sort of connecting in a way that they can understand. Because like a lot of people who come into Krav Maga, they're not necessarily, let's just say, intellectual or education. They don't want to hear the talking. They want to punch the faces. And I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Like, you really need to understand, because I know most of you aren't going to be here past 3 months. So let's get you to understand. And I've started connecting it to mental health in many ways, and teaching the nervous system is no different if you're having a panic attack versus someone's attacking you and you're freaking out. It's trying to connect it all in a holistic way to make people be able to understand how their nervous system works and their reactions will speed up or slow down. Also connecting it to how to use your body. Some people get the blank looks on their face and they'll pick it up in a year, and other people are like, oh, I never thought it like that. So it's certainly, there's tons of ways you can explore the human condition and Krav Maga combined, I think. Yeah.
What really blew my mind was, I always knew something was missing, but okay, I paint the scenario as this. Okay, let's say you're a guy and you're in a bar, and somebody walks up to you and pushes you, and they're intent on fighting with you. And we speak about fight or flight, right? What's the best possible response you can have in that scenario? What's the best tactical strategy? And remember, what's the goal? The goal is, to not get hurt, right? So what's the best possible strategy when somebody comes up to you and starts to pick a fight with you? It's that obvious. You don't even have to ask. You turn around, you start running. Yeah. You don't even exchange a single word. Somebody comes up, you say, what you looking at? I don't even talk to him. I just turn around and start running as fast as I can. Yeah. Obviously, what's the likelihood that they're going to chase after you in that specific setting? Almost nothing. We're not talking about a terrorist with a knife coming. We're talking about in a bar, somebody wants to fight you to show all their friends that they're a tough guy. You turn around and run. There will be no fight. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Right? What's the likelihood of somebody actually doing that? Close to zero.
Yeah.
Now, why? How can you explain that? Because here we have a scenario where I can tell you, if you do this, I don't guarantee many things. I'll almost guarantee that if you turn around and run, there will be no fight. Doesn't it make sense that that's what people would do?
Yeah.
But that almost never happens. What's the next best thing you could do? You don't say a single word, right? He says, you want to fight? Boom! You punch him right there. And then, without a single word, you punch him as hard as you can, straight in the jaw, knock him down. Don't give him any warning. Yeah. I'm not talking about legally. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But as far as survival goes, evolutionary survival, that's your second best bet. What percentage of people will do that? Almost zero. The only person who would do that is probably a psychopath. It's probably somebody there's something wrong with their wiring that they'll just go. What will most of us do? One of two things. Okay, but that already has got to get you thinking, because we have fight or flight.
Yeah.
Right. Both of them are almost surefire. Well, running away is almost surefire. Number two is it depends how good your punch is and how big their jaw is. Okay, but it's still it's still up there. But almost nobody will do that. Okay, what will they do? Well, number one is depends. If you're also, blokey bloke and you're not too small, you'll probably push them back. And you'll probably go, you don't want to fight me. I'll, I've got a third-degree black belt in Hu Flung Dung Kung Fu or whatever, right? Or you'll say, I wasn't looking at you. I don't have a problem. You got a problem? That's called posturing, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to try to show them that it's costly to start a fight with me. I'm going to say this is not going to go your way, or at least I'm going to exact some price that this is not going to be a worthwhile endeavor for you. And that makes sense because evolutionary, and this is not to give too much away of what I was talking about in the podcast over there, but it makes sense because in hunter-gatherer societies, if anybody could just come and push me around and I'd turn around and run, everybody would realize that they could do that. I'd lose all my resources and no member of the opposite species would want to mate with me because I can't secure, I won't be able to provide or secure for the offspring. So evolution has geared us that if you're a bloke, you want at least to put on some, even if you're going to lose the fight, from an evolution perspective, let's get out of the bar for a second and into our hunter-gatherer societies. It makes a point to put up some sort of fight, even if you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
What's the other alternative? The other alternative that we might do is we might say, look, I really don't want to fight you. I'm sorry. My bad. Let me buy you a beer. What am I doing here? I'm submitting. Okay? I'm saying I recognize that you're the alpha, that you're dominant here. I don't want this interaction. I'm submitting because, and again, this has some evolutionary purpose because I still need to stay in my social circle, let's say. Okay? So there is some evolutionary strategy. So that means that when we talk about fight or flight, doesn't give us the full picture. If you're faced with what is the Monty Python skit? A tiger in Africa? Something like that?
I don't
know.
Yeah.
I'm putting too much. But, if you're facing a lion, right, you can't really posture up to the lion. The lion doesn't care about your third-degree black belt, does it? Right? You probably should run. And if running isn't an option, I don't know, grab the biggest rock, the stick, and, pray to, whatever deity you believe in and put up some sort of a fight. There is nothing but fight or flight against members of a different species. But when we're dealing with members of the same species, it becomes more complicated. First of all, every fight is not a fight to the death. Most of them aren't. And then we have something that's more likely. So I see the model as opposed to fight, flight, and freeze. I see fight, flight, posture, and submit. And we're going to be more likely to posture and submit towards members of the same species of us. And if we start to understand that, that's the beginning of having some control over it. I know that if I'm a young man and somebody walks up into me that has a bit of testosterone in him, and somebody walks up to me in a bar, I know that my primal hormones are going to be shouting at me to stand up, even though it makes no sense, survival. Because the best thing, I can just walk out of there and I go to another bar. Like, I don't care, So he made me look like a fool. There's nothing lost here for me because, I never have to see any of these people again. I was speaking to somebody also the other day, Terry Tran, who's a former bikie enforcer, and he said, he actually called a challenge on that. He said that's not so clear cut because if you go, he's from Texas, right? Yeah. And if you're in rural Texas, there aren't that many bars around, right? And everybody knows everybody. And if somebody comes at you and, steps on your foot or spills some beer on you, if you don't make your stand, it's much more, let's say, hunter-gatherer mentality over there. You got to make your stand. I mean, of course, Texans are famous for making their stands to make their stand, right? So, it's not.
Remember the Alamo, right? Yeah.
So it's not that clear cut. It's not just fight or flight. It doesn't tell the whole story. And if you're interested, and if you're trying to deliver people skills that are going to protect them from violence, your job doesn't finish just with the mechanics of punching, blocking, kicking, or choking somebody out.
Yeah. Well, it's so you've basically, so the freeze is usually like the biological mechanism is it's not doing what it's supposed to do, which is fight or flight, but seems like you're adding in the posture or submit is a very much the social complex social aspect of human behavior. And I think like, you know, the whole keyboard warrior. So historically, and you can see it in nature still, where if I choose to fight, it's a risk because I could win that fight and I could still die. You know, humans, we have our medicine now. It's not as risky to actually fight nowadays for those who want to. While as in the past, it's a huge risk. You may have to assert your dominance physically because otherwise someone's going to come and stab you in the back and you have to convince, you know, your social group that I'm not worth fighting. Or on the other end nowadays, you can, you know, crazy beats big. If you really convince someone that they're not with the fight, that's when you're kind of activating that, oh, I don't want to get hurt kind of thing, I think. It's gotten I think we're at a place in human evolution where the lines are getting really blurred because our social structures and technological changes is altering our behavior in a way that, you know, our biology is not necessarily sure what to do, which may explain the rise in mental health issues, although I'm not sure if it's because of that or if we just started measuring it in the last 100 years. No one's shown me proof either way, but I would say that in the next 1,000 years, we're going to start to see some changes in that behavior, but I have no idea, and I don't think anyone will, what's going to happen. Because as we no longer need that primal fight or flight as much for survival, and the social thing becomes far more important, it's going to be very interesting to see how we handle violence in the future, you know?
Well, human beings are incredibly adaptive. That's something very unique about our species. And that's why we survive so well in so many different environments. And let's say the flexibility, the plasticity of our brains and the tools that we have, like we're social animals. That's the whole thesis, right? That our brain has become so big and so developed, and it's cost us a lot to develop such a big brain. I mean, it's a big, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of calories to keep this, to get this brain running and to keep it running. But also, you know, human beings, by far the animal that it takes the longest time until we're self-sufficient, until we're no longer reliant on our parents for survival. Like I have a 1-month-old at the moment at home, and like, you know, we're incapable of looking after ourselves until we're about, you know, probably 10, 11, 12 years old. Like our brain isn't even fully cooked when it comes out of the oven, right? When we come out at birth, because it needs to be capable of so much power. Now, what takes so much power? Why do we need that? The argument is that we need it for complex social relations that we have among ourselves, right? Like it wouldn't do a zebra very much. This is again stealing from Professor von Hippel. It wouldn't help a zebra to have the biggest brain in the world because it could have maybe very interesting conversations with other zebras, but it doesn't quite have opposing thumbs. It can't really do anything with that brain. It would just be a very big expenditure, and there's no way that a zebra could eat enough grass to be able to have enough calories to get this brain going. But so why do humans need such big brains? Well, we need to work together in order to survive. That's really what a species have. We're not bigger, we're not stronger, we don't have bigger teeth. There's really pitiful as far as, you know, physical capabilities that we have are. So one human being on their own is nothing. You put them in the wild pretty much anywhere and they'll die.
Yeah.
But the moment you put in 10 humans together anywhere in the wild without any resources, it won't take very long until they become the top of the food chain and they start dominating the landscape. And that's because as a team, we work together, right? So in order to work together, I need to not just understand my world, but I need to have a representation of how you understand the world. And I need to understand that, okay, wait, his face is showing something off. Maybe he's unhappy with something that I did. Okay. What did I do? Okay. Because if you're unhappy with something that I did and a few other people are unhappy, well, you guys might just decide. The first thing is you guys might, this is quite interesting because this is true across all human societies all the way back, right? If I'm starting to act in a way that's harmful for the group, the first thing the group will do is you'll start ignoring me. You'll give me a signal. That's warning number one. You start ignoring me. You'll start pretending that I'm not there. You won't talk to me. You won't interact with me. You'll give me, mean faces and stuff. That's kind of a warning of setting the boundaries. Okay.
Yeah.
The next step is, okay, you'll start to isolate me. You won't start letting me participate in things. You'll start excluding me from things. Very quickly, it isolates that everybody's going to stone me to death. Right? Because I might be the strongest person in a group, but doesn't matter how strong I am, I'm no match for, six members of the group who pick up stones and start throwing at me. And that's pretty much, that's something that I'd say it's a powerful multiplier, the stone throwing part, right? Because if me and my 10, best hunter-gatherer, hunters were out there and we wanted to hunt whatever, woolly mammoth, or an elephant or a tiger, like the first one who jumps on the lion is dead. The second one is also dead. The third one is dead. Maybe the fourth or the fifth will have, something going for it. Maybe it's not. But that doesn't really help us because to pass on our genes, there's no incentive for being the first one to jump on the lion. There's really no. But if we can all stand back a little bit and start throwing stones or spears or whatever it is at the lion, if there's enough of us, 20 people throwing stones, and the hunter-gatherers were really, really, really good at throwing stones, then you could take down almost anything.
Yeah. I wonder, it just brings up, I'm just thinking, because if we're biologically driven to need to work in a group to survive, nowadays, in our literal day-to-day life, we don't need the group per se on a day-to-day interaction, and that could be causing that breakdown in social behavior right now because everyone is sort of isolated. We're surviving because of the group, but in our personal experiences day-to-day, a lot of people are sitting by themselves in front of the computer. Even though they're surviving by the group, they're not getting that day-to-day feedback, and that could be leading to the shenanigans we're seeing all over the world right now with behavioral breakdown.
Well, it's not the whole story because we're developed to work together well within our group. But we're also developed to fight against outside groups, right?
In group,
who
out
compete
group,
against resources. So all the keyboard warring, all the fighting, it's especially we see it now in modern politics. This polarization of people are saying, "This is my group, and I'm going to toe the line of whatever my group says. Doesn't matter how crazy or how preposterous it is." And anybody who doesn't agree with us 100%, they're the enemy. And we're going to fight them 100%. We're very much geared for that as a society. To pick our group, to be loyal to our group, and to fight other societies, other groups, outside groups to the death. And the internet has made it very easy. Like my group, nowadays, it used to be my community, my neighborhood. My group could be, a public forum on 4chan or whatever. And, the outside group can be, somebody who I've never had interaction or seen before.
Yeah.
And, it's thrilling. It's absolutely for me, that's the most interesting topic to really, understand who we are and what drives our behavior. And if you can understand that, there's a very big relevancy to Krav Maga and to self-defense. Because if you can understand that, you can understand what the people who are going to attack you, what their motivations are likely going to be, what are the things that are going to be able to deter them. And you can also understand what you're going to likely do. Forget about logic for a second, but what you've been preconditioned to do, not only from a physical instinctive perspective, but also from an emotional perspective.
Yeah. No, it's super exciting to hear that. Because, when I started Krav, 2008. And it's the technique, learn the technique. And then I'm like rooting on it. Okay, this is self-defense. What does that mean? And I love history and I love psychology. So I started, slowly adding in, global politics and all that. And at first people are like, this is not Krav Maga. And I'm like, okay, everyone likes to travel to Thailand, right? And they're like, yeah. hey, how many of you knew there was a military coup a few years ago? And they just look at you blank. And I'm like, okay, what had happened? What would have happened if you were there during that time on your vacation and you're not aware of the global politics in the area that you are, and you get caught up in a coup? How's that going to go for you? Yeah, and a lot of people still have a hard time because they really got it in their head. Krav Maga is punching, kicking, kicking the groin, punching the throat. And then I'm trying to explain to them, if you don't even know what's going on in your own country, this is the story I like to use. I'm like, what happened to Jews in World War II? And everyone, yeah, that you guys were killed. I'm said, well, not everyone, because if you listen, I listened to this really awesome story. I always forget his name. He was one of the top early, real estate investors as an investment class in the States. And his father, it was either Poland or Germany, was like, hey, something is not right here. He's paying attention to the German Nazi party, etc. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna do some exploring. And he went off out east looking for his exits. Comes back, tells his family, the whole extended family, we gotta go. This is not good. The politics are not good. And they're all like, you're crazy. You know how a lot of them were. We're established. I don't want to move. He says, screw you, grabs his young kids, his wife or whatever, bails. They were on the last train out, and they ended up being one of the 2000 or the family of the 2,000 Jews that the Japanese ambassador got out through the Lithuanian embassy. And I'm like, that's an amazing story to explain. You need to understand what's going on in your country. You need to go and understand what's going on in other countries, because the Jews know very well, sometimes even in society, you got to run. And if you have no idea what is going on because you have normalcy bias, everything is fine yesterday, everything is going to be fine today, everything will be fine tomorrow, my country can never fall apart. I'm like, have you looked at what's going on in America right now? That country is on the path to breaking up, guys. Stop with this. And then you start teaching people, and some people get it. They're like, that makes complete sense. And other people, they're just like, I just want to punch people. But to me, it's all self-defense. And I know what was interesting, because I was watching your posts during the recent conflict, and you're making a lot of posts, political and otherwise. And it's unusual for the Israeli Krav Maga community right now, because a lot of them have chosen not to talk about this stuff at all. So I think it's fascinating.
That's the thing, for a long time, at the beginning, I guess, I'm very passionate about my people and my country,
Yeah.
and and it hurts when you see the rubbish and the misinformation that's spread around. And as somebody who's there and has a platform, I'm happy to share. I feel it's my duty to be able to share, to give my side of of the conflict, of somebody who lives here, who's experienced it, who's lived through it, whose parents and grandparents have lived through it. And there's certainly a price to be paid if you choose to be vocal on that side. And it's nothing new. Things have polarized. The price has become greater, but there was always a price. And I used to say, I teach Krav Maga. That's what I do. I've got my personal opinions, but they're my own. And I don't have to. The two don't necessarily need to mix. And I think what really made the shift was that I kind of said, screw it. I don't shove my politics down anybody's face. It's not even politics. Like a lot of the stuff that I describe, it's showing the logical, the viewpoint of kind of where we're at and what's happening. But I said, to hell with it. If there's some people who I'm not right about everything, and the different viewpoints to different stories, but I believe that this viewpoint is an important one to be heard. And if it offends somebody, if they don't like it, then they're perfectly fine. I'm okay if people say, look, I don't like Ron's politics, so I don't want to train with him. I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's a cost I'm willing to bear. But on the other hand, also, I don't expect. I have a lot of my best friends, a lot of people who train with me. They can say, look, I don't agree with you over here, or I don't. You're wrong in my opinion, and that's perfectly fine. That's important. That's healthy. I've got a lot of excellent students from Turkey, from the United Arab Emirates. I've trained Jordanians, Egyptians. I've I've trained Israeli Arabs. I'm happy to train anybody who wants to learn Krav Maga and wants to protect themselves and their community. And Krav Maga is a defensive art, and it's a defensive thing, and it's there for everybody. I couldn't care less about the color of your skin. I couldn't care less about your religion. I couldn't care less about your sexual orientation. That's your business, and everybody has the right, to their opinions and to live their life. And I'd fight for anybody's right to be able to have the religion and to be the way they want. But I don't mind. I speak my mind, and if that bothers somebody, let them be bothered.
Yeah. So, I mean, since we're on it, because a lot of people might not know what just happened. So, what's in Israel? What kind of is your perspective on all that as someone who had to live through that in the recent month or two?
Look, I think the bottom line is that the Israeli-Arab conflict is something that goes back a few hundred years. Right. And it is a complex thing. It's far more complex than could be understood through one infographic or, some, model or Instagram personality that decides to put on a post. And I think that's the problem, because people want to simplify, people want to fight for the right. And that's good. But a lot of times people get trapped and get taken into things that are far more simplistic. And this is a complex thing. Look, bottom line, if you want to talk to me about my politics, I'll say it. There are two nations here, and both of them are here. And you can't deny that there's no getting away from it. We can talk about history, which I'm very happy to discuss. We can talk about legal rights. We can talk about whatever you like. But at the end of the day, these are people here, the Palestinians and the Israelis, who are living, breathing, and they have no other place to go. So there's no alternative besides learning how to live together with one another in peace. It will happen. The sooner, the less suffering there's going to be, but it will happen because there is no other alternative. Yeah. And that's, I think, that people, there's we can argue until tomorrow, and obviously, as a Jewish person, who's who has a long connection of thousands of years to this land, I can lay out very clearly why we belong here, but that doesn't take away from any others buddy's right also to belong here. And let's say I could give you the best argument of why only Jews should be here and Arabs or Muslims have no right to be here and they shouldn't be here. Let's say that was the case, which it's not, but let's say it was. How does that help? How does that get us one step closer to the solution? Let's say I was able to prove that historically Palestinians had no right to be here. Okay, so what? They were born here. This is their place. What are you going to do with it? Same thing here. I was born here. My mother was born here. This is my country.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. So I think that's the thing. People focus on. I think that the politics. I don't want to say that they're irrelevant. I think the historical thing, it's important, but none of that gets us any closer to a solution. Yeah. We need to find how to live together. There is no other alternative. But I'll also say that until that day comes, as long as there are people out there that want to kill me and my family, I don't really care if they think that they're justified or what. Like, I'm going to stand firm and I'm going to protect my country, my family, and the people that I love, and I'm going to do that fiercely, just as anybody else would. Yeah. So that's it. When people are shooting rockets at my family, I'm going to do everything I can to defend so. And that doesn't mean that I want or I'm happy to see casualties on the other side. I don't want to see anybody die.
Yeah.
I don't even Yeah.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, it makes sense.
But that's, I don't see how any other position could be rational.
Yeah.
There's no other choice. We got to learn to live together, and any death is on either side is is a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like I'll
Also,
tell. Well, it's not funny. It's not a funny topic. But what I saw on my Facebook from all my Israeli friends was like, I swear to God, if I have to go do this again, I'm gonna be so pissed. And I was telling people, like my Israeli friends do not want to go to another war. They're not interested in it. And I was like, did you know that most Israelis are not interested in it? Like they don't want to, but they will. And a lot of people they just don't know because they sit and they see the memes with the crappy information. I see people. I saw a rise in anti-Semitic memes. Even people that I respect. It's like, what are you posting? I love the history, and I find a lot of people first of all, don't know the history. So there's a mistaken starting point. But I say, like, it doesn't really matter. Like the Balfour Declaration, all that. Who cares? People forget that for so much of human history, whoever controlled the land is whoever won the war. And I'm like, listen, you don't have to like it. We won the war. And then guess what? We built a very strong nation where Arabs and Palestinians and Druzes and Christians can all live. Deal with it. What are you going to do moving forward?
Look, people don't know. People don't. I mean, most people don't even know their own history, the history of their country, the history of their nations. But all of a sudden, everybody's an expert in Middle East politics and history, which is one of the most complex. Not one of the most. It's probably the most complex region and in the world. So I certainly don't. I mean, yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, misinformation does not not help. It's like a lot of people I think choose not to talk about this stuff because you are going to get into heated debates. I had a situation a few years ago during the Syrian conflict with all the refugees. Well, it's no shock I despise our current prime minister, but what he did, like an asshole, is he was playing a PR thing where he's like, "Oh, look at the refugees! Look at the refugees! Let's bring in the refugees." Except what they were actually doing was sending people over to the camps, picking and choosing who they wanted to come to the country, which is something about Canadian immigration. Canadians don't even know. They're very strict here. It's not as bad as Australia, but they're very strict. And I was just explaining, like, I don't think you understand that our government isn't just saying, come refugees. They're not actually taking the most destitute people. They're picking and choosing who they want, probably to do with political stuff, because, if you bring the refugees that are educated, they'll vote for you. It's a tactic. And people are just like, you are anti-Islamophobic. I'm like, that's not what I said. I'm just saying, can you please understand what your government is actually doing and not what you think they're doing? And I had so many people down my throats, and you can see why people don't want to talk about it. I just want to educate people, and a lot of people can't be bothered. They just like put their head down because the social pressure of, hey, you guys, you might not have the right picture here. It's a lot for some people. And then back to our nervous system. Most people only have the capacity for their immediate family and maybe their students. And they're like, I can't deal with it. But I just think it's so important because so many people they don't know. And I'm very much in informing people. I have stopped on the Israel thing, doing it on the internet and doing, hey, let's have a conversation in person, because usually the messaging just explodes into a bunch of nonsense. So I'll be like, hey, if you want to talk about this, let's go get coffee and I can explain what I know and let's have a conversation. I found, though, that a lot of people don't want to do that. You take away the internet and you say, listen, let's have a one-on-one conversation. I'll buy you coffee. Let's discuss this. And they'll be like, yeah, let's do it next week here. And then you'll get, hey, something came up. And then they don't want to, when you take away that internet, they don't want to be confronted with the reality that they probably think I know a lot that they don't, and I'm going to correct them. And they don't want to do that. They'd rather, no, Israel's bad, the Jews are bad, they're taking over the world. All that nonsense. It's definitely an uphill battle. And one that I'm not sure is it's a challenge right now, especially the way everything is going crazy. It's good to know Krav Maga at this time, though, I think. Now, teaching civilians. Let's go back to get out of that topic. It's quite dense. I have, like, the way I've developed my program is the beginner stuff is like, I just need you to get your head around it, and I'm going to teach you the fundamentals. Punching, kicking, moving, basic self-defense. Then sort of mid-levels, I start teaching. Okay, now I can actually teach you some wrestling and boxing, because now that you have the framework of self-defense, you're not going to think we're just fighting right away. And then I build up even civilians, like, hey, now I'm going to teach you how to arrest people. How I'm going to teach you how to use firearms. Because even though in Canada, you're not legally allowed to have guns for self-defense, legally speaking, that's not to say if someone comes with a gun, I get it away, and their friend comes with a gun, I need to know what to do with it. So I consider it all self-defense. So how do you integrate sort of that military police stuff that is often self-defense, like Texas, you would certainly need it, into your civilian program for people with no firearms experience, for example?
Well, look, as a Krav Maga instructor, you need to be able to really adapt the training for the people to be relevant for whoever it is you're training. Now, there might be different needs or requirements. If it's a woman self-defense class, let's say, or if you're training soldiers, or if you're training, civilians that are going to come for, a couple of times a week for training, or whether it's just a, once-off workshop, you need to be able to kind of put together and structure things. What you're talking about is, I believe, like the long-term.
Long-term.
For somebody who's coming in and is going to maybe train with you for a few years, maybe even a bit more than that. I guess my starting point, when you come to learn from me, the very first things you're going to learn how to stand, you can learn how to move, you can learn the basic tools that we're going to be using later on. So like standing, punches, kicking, elbows, knees, all the basics. We also learn some of the most common, releases from grabs and chokes, the things that are part and parcel for Krav Maga. But a lot of that it's not just attack itself. For example, if you're learning how to defend when somebody grabs you with a choke with two hands from the front, and you're learning how to clear their hands from your throat and how to counter strike, what you're really learning to do is go from a defensive position of when you were attacked into going from defense into offensive very quickly in order to be able to push your attacker away from you. But there's also another element, because this is not just in a vacuum. They've got their hands on you. This offers a very good platform to teach people without a lot of experience on how to maneuver and how to use when the hands are in play, right? You've got your hands in front on my throat, and I need to be able to not just release your hands, but I need to start hitting and moving and getting around you while your hands are on me or moving around. So at the very basic levels, I learned the skills of how to deal with somebody grabbing me or somebody throwing a punch, and how to go on to the offense from there. It's also very important that it doesn't stop there, because, and I think this is something that a lot of people miss in Krav Maga, a lot of instructors miss in Krav Maga. The fight can turn very quickly. Often people train, instructors will teach what they'd like to see themselves be doing. What I mean by that is, okay, you grab me by the throat, I'm going to clear your hands, I'm going to throw an uppercut, I'm going to throw a couple of straight punches, knees, elbows, until you fall on the ground. I'm going to throw a couple of hammer strikes, and boom, I won the fight. Okay, which is nice. But in reality, if I choose that strategy, and let's say, going back to, I'm not a big guy, or let's say I'm a girl, and I've got somebody much bigger than me grabbing me. So they grabbed me by the throat. I was able to clear the hands. I kicked them in the balls. Maybe I shocked them. Probably I shocked them, because they weren't expecting that. If they were expecting a fight, they wouldn't have grabbed me by the throat. They would have maybe thrown a punch. So for 1 second, I have the advantage of surprise, right? I kicked them in the balls. Let's say I was able to punch them in the face. Great. They're stunned. Okay? But if they're a big guy, there's no reason to expect that that's going to take them down, especially if I'm not very big. Or let's say I'm not a Krav Maga black belt. Let's say I'm only a yellow belt. Maybe I've only been training for a few months, because, also yellow belts need to be able to protect themselves. So very quickly, if I keep on this mindset of the black belt, big, tough guy instructor who can defeat anybody, and I'm going to follow up my punches with elbows, with knees, well, surprise is no longer with me.
Yeah.
And assuming that the person who attacked me is still standing, well, now they enter the fight. And that's a fight I may not be able to win.
Yeah.
So if I come with the humility of understanding that I may not be able to win every fight. In fact, a lot of the fights, a lot of the confrontations that I'm going to find myself in, I probably won't be able to fight. So what I can hope to do is get off a few good strikes in order to push the attacker off of me so that I can turn around and run, or maybe pull out a firearm if I'm armed, or maybe grab an object or something else that will enable me to survive that confrontation. Right? So that's really where we start off with. And that's something that I found lacking almost anywhere you train. Boxing, you learn to, knock out your opponent or to win off points. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're learning how to submit somebody, right? And in karate, it's also, all these martial arts, they're geared for one-on-one fighting with opponents who are more or less the same size and the same skill set. And therefore, I train to win because, that's a reasonable thing to be asked. But in Krav Maga, for a long time, when I was a kid training growing up and later, and also when I was a junior instructor teaching, I was teaching people to win fights, right? Somebody grabs you by the throat, this is how you win the fight. Somebody pulls a knife on you, this is how you win the fight. You get them on the ground or you disarm them or whatever, Somebody puts you in a headlock, this is how you put them on the ground so that they can't fight anymore. Yeah. But that's wrong for self-defense, because there may not be a scenario in which you can win the fight. So I'm not saying it's enough to, okay, I'm going to throw a kick to the balls and run away. I may have to do a lot more danger than that. But I'm always gearing to disengage. And to me, that's the purpose of Krav Maga. The purpose of Krav Maga, and this is, I ask always my students at the first part, they're going to say, well, it's to survive. I say, well, at some point or other, you're going to die. Hopefully it's in your bed when you're old and gray and you've got all your grandparents looking for you. But, survival, that's not an end goal. In the fight, it's disengaging. And if I'm training to win the fight, I may just end up making things worse. I may end up having a strategy that's going to kill me. Because if I say, okay, well, I'm really good at pulling guard or putting somebody in an armbar or something like that, and that's my go-to, or I might be really good at getting somebody in a clinch, a Muay Thai clinch, and taking them apart with my knees. And I'm geared to win the fight. But, I might not be able to win the fight. Maybe, doesn't matter how good you are in jiu-jitsu. And again, the end goal is not just that only black belts will be able to defend themselves, but also yellow belts and blue belts and purple belts and whatnot. It may not be a reasonable ask just by the use of techniques for somebody who's of smaller stature to be able to defeat somebody who's bigger than them, or somebody to be able to defeat 3 or 4 opponents.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, I always say, I'll teach and I'll be like, hey, what I'm showing you right now is what I call textbook. Everything is perfect. And then I'm like, guess what? It's never going to be perfect. You want to train as good as you can in the gym so that you inevitably, as it gets worse and worse and worse on the street, that you're at a higher level than you would otherwise, because obviously there's a certain complete fail point in your skill set versus somebody else. And some people take longer than others to realize I'm going to have to fill in the blanks, because the what if this, and I'm like, you need to train more. Just come for 6 months, and then if you still want to answer that question, then I'll ask it. But I'm sure you're going to figure it out eventually. And then you get the smaller students. It's like, well, how can I beat them? I'm like, you can't. You can only, as you said, stun them and then get your exit. And I don't know what it's like in Israel, but here, the whole positivity culture and believe in yourself and all that, it drives me nuts because it's not realistic sometimes. And I'm like,
it's not just the positivity culture, right? You got to remember who's teaching Krav Maga, who's teaching boxing, who's teaching jiu-jitsu, right? We're guys and girls. We love combat, right? Yeah. It's not by coincidence that we chose to dedicate our lives to become very proficient in the use of violence, right? So we're not people who like to lose fights, or who even, who want to admit that there are battles that we'll never be able to win. Doesn't matter how much training we have. That's something that's a very, very hard pill to swallow. Yeah. So then we approach our training and going, well, either we delude ourselves and our students and going, well, if they just train hard enough, or if they do it long enough, or if they have the right technique, then they'll be able to beat their opponent. And that's, martial arts and combat sports as a general, dedicated and we saw this in the UFC, right? They all ask one question. The question is, who would win in a fight, right? Who would win in a fight? Boxing versus wrestling, right? Jiu-jitsu versus Thai boxing, right? Who would win in a fight? Or, Mexican boxing versus Cuban boxing. Or, Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin, whatever, right? And then, because that's what they ask, that's the type of answers that they get, right? In Krav Maga, we shouldn't be asking who would win in a fight. That's of no use to us because we don't fight. We deal with assault. Krav Maga, we ask, what if? And that's why you get it a lot in training, right? Krav Maga instructors get what if. Sometimes it drives us crazy.
Yeah.
And you got to sometimes put a boundary, because it's like, what if somebody came at me with a machete? It's like, that's nice, but I'm trying to teach you rear naked choke today. We'll get the machete another time. Okay? But the reason we get that, like, nobody asks a boxer, what do you do if somebody comes at you with a machete? Because it's irrelevant. That's not boxing. But in Krav Maga, that's something we deal with. And somebody asks who would win in a fight. Well, I say, well, the person who surprised the other guy with a brick to the head from behind, they'll win the fight every time, right?
Yeah.
So now we don't say who would win the fight. We say, okay, what if somebody approached me like that? So we say, okay, let's start with situational awareness. Okay. And then we say, okay, what if somebody much bigger than me approached me? We're like, okay, well, let's have a think about that, right? What if they grabbed me like this? Okay. Now, yes, and that's what Krav Maga does very effectively. It shouldn't be 500 different techniques for 500 different problems, because the problems are endless, right? The variations in which one can get attacked are never ending.
Yeah.
But that's something that we always get hit with. What if this happened? What if that happened? And then I need to, as instructor, I say, is this a reasonable scenario?
Yeah.
Well, if it is, I sure as hell better have an answer to that, right? I don't get to say, well, we don't do that, okay? And that's something very unique about Krav Maga, and it's a problem because as instructors, very often we're in the mindset of who would win in a fight, right? What's a better martial art? It really depends, and it's not a question that has any use for me in Krav Maga.
Yeah. Well, even like that, like I do jiu-jitsu too. Like, I love it. I train it a lot more than I do Krav right now. There are some days I can beat this person and some days they can beat me. And self-defense is so much of like, are you tired today? Did you eat well today? Did you sleep well today?
That's no good for me as a Krav Maga. Like, as somebody who's preparing people to face life and death violence, someday, I can beat them. Someday they beat me. That's no good for me. 50-50 is not acceptable. Is not acceptable criteria for walking into it. I need something that sure as hell is going to get me out of that scenario. And then the mechanics of it are really not like, they're important. You need to know how to block against a knife. You need to know, but it exists in a bigger picture. And in Krav Maga, something that we have very useful is the scenarios, right? In Krav Maga, we build scenarios because it's not enough. Okay, great. I guess it would be equivalent. Great. You can punch the punching bag. You're really good at punching the punching bag. You've got an awesome punch. Well, guess what? First time you step into a ring against an opponent in boxing who's trying to punch you back, you're not that good at punching anymore. Like, everything goes out the window. Everything you thought you knew. Okay. Yeah. I draw the same equivalency of it. Okay, good. You can defend against a knife, or you can defend a takedown or avoid getting taken down from the ground. Okay, but can you do it against somebody who's relatively stronger than you on asphalt? Okay. Yeah. Can you defend against a knife against somebody who's already stabbed you a couple of times from behind because you didn't see them, and now as you turn around, you need to fight survival? Can you do that? Well, I'm going to structure my training that you test yourself on that. So that the first time you have to answer that question out on the street, God forbid, it's not the first time you're confronted with that situation. Yeah. And even if I can't build the exact scenario for you, I can build enough scenarios that you're so good at adapting your skill set and the tools of the trade that we use into different environments that you can do it quickly on the fly, instinctively. Whatever.
Yeah, I can't say it either. Oh,
instinctively. Yeah. That you can do it instinctively and survive that confrontation.
Yeah. Well, I think what I was getting at is that, people come in and they're like, I'm always going to beat them. And I'm like, you're not always going to be in the ideal situation, right? You could be tired. You could be, and if you're playing that fight game, you're not going to win, right? That's kind of what I was saying. Because, guys that I can beat sometimes and they can beat me sometimes. Some of them I'm fairly confident in the street I'm going to win every time because my willingness to be violent is more than them. But then there's other guys I train with. I'm like, even though they don't do Krav Maga, I'm like, no, I know his willingness to do violence is very high. And these are the aspects a lot of students don't always think about. Like for biting, for example, I don't necessarily. I'll remind students of teaching that they can bite, but I don't necessarily like emphasize it because I've seen a lot of people are not going to bite, and I've had people tell me, yeah, I bit someone in real life, and as soon as I tasted their flesh, I let go. And I'm like, well, then it's not a useful tool for you, right? It's that willingness to, because if you bite me, I'm going to knock your teeth out, right? I'm going to treat it, you bit me, I'm going to shove my forearm right in your face, and you're going to lose teeth. And so, regardless of your skill set or your size, right, it's can you get them to realize, are you willing to fight for yourself in that moment? Some people can do it instinctually, usually because they had a messed up childhood or they've been trained
Well,
heavily.
it's also the wrong mindset. Again, in terms of, I almost I don't deal with face to face, one on one conflict. Like the assumption is that if I'm ever having to use my skills or any of my students, it's not going to be against somebody their size. That won't happen. It won't be in a situation where they've kind of seen it gearing up and they're ready to go. Like that's not going to happen. They're going to be assaulted from behind. They may be with their kids. Maybe somebody will pull out a knife and try to stab them. Maybe it's going to be somebody bigger than them. So this whole context of, of envisioning what the fight goes down, like we're hyper focused, especially guys, right? Especially men, and especially men who have dedicated their lives to martial arts. We're very much geared. It's funny. It's almost like right. We're evolutionary geared to say, if I had to take this on and this guy would fight, who would reign victorious? And a lot of our thinking goes to that. Can I take this guy?
Yeah.
And we slip into, me too, we slip into that all the time. And we need to train ourselves to push that aside and go, can I train this guy? That's irrelevant because it's not the guy that I'm up against. It's the scenario. It's the situation. Okay. Because even that guy, it's not like, we're going to go at it and it's going to be even. I'm going to be at a disadvantage from, even from the most basic thing of, let's say somebody ambushed you, right? And they wanted to, they attacked you, right? Because if I discount it's called technically status seeking aggression, right? Status seeking aggression is, is the bro fight, right? Two guys going at it that's status seeking aggression. I don't do that. If somebody's in my face and says, come on, you want to go? Bye. I'm gone. I'm not interested. Like it's very hard, especially somebody who's dedicated their life to violence. It's very hard to provoke me to do something that I don't want to do. I mean, if somebody pushes me and is aggressive in my face, like I voluntarily get punched in the face on a regular basis in training. Like I literally enjoy getting punched. I've been doing it for so long in sparring and stuff. I like punching people. I like getting punched. I like punching people just a little bit better than I like getting punched myself. But that was a joke, by the way.
Yeah.
But like I don't skip a beat that much from the threat of violence. Okay. So to get me to react the situation would have to be quite extreme. Right?
Yeah.
But as a Krav Maga instructor, I'm not just concerned about myself. I'm concerned about other people too. But the people that I train, we don't do that. Okay, that doesn't exist. The two guys duking it out. Sorry, that's I don't talk about those scenarios. They don't interest me. You shouldn't be fighting in those scenarios. And also, that's not a life or death situation. So I'm more interested about all these things, about assault, about the thing that you don't expect, or the situation that you couldn't get out of. And there,
Yeah.
the traditional answers of outboxing them or out grappling them, like it's not really about that.
Yeah. No, that's good. Like, because I have been trying to figure out what's the easiest way to explain to people you're not fighting, you're doing self defense, right? Because, I find sometimes I'll get a really athletic student who has done some kind of martial arts, MMA or boxing, and they very rarely stay because they're like, oh, I can fight. And getting people to understand that difference, like you're not trying to fight I'm not teaching you to fight. I'm teaching you self-defense. And a lot of people really struggle. And I
Well,
think
that
you have,
that's one thing that I found quite a couple of years ago. I stopped using the word fight to
mm,
describe what we do. In Krav Maga, we don't fight,
mm,
right? We deal with assault.
yeah,
And that once you understand that, that really makes the difference, right? I love who would win in a street fight, right?
yeah,
The mere concept of a street fight is ridiculous if you really understand. Like, what the hell is a street fight, right? It's a competition. It's a boxing match that happens out on the street, or an MMA match over there, right? It's the same thing, right? I pull into your car space, right? You come out of there, you go, that's my fucking car space. I go, no, it's mine. And you say you want to go. You move
yeah,
your car out. I say, I'm not moving your car. There's this whole ritual, right? Then
yeah,
you push me, I push you. You say, you get your hands off of me. I swipe your hands off, and then we're at it, right? And everybody gets the cameras out. And there's this whole ritual. It's a competition. It's a competition. And how do we know it's a competition? Because everybody wants to see it, right? The schoolyard fight,
yeah,
everybody comes, everybody watches it. There's useful information to be gained here, because there's a fight here for the social hierarchy, right? And at the minimum, I want to know who's going to reign victorious, because from a hunter-gatherer societies, it's important for me to know the hierarchies of the group and who's above who. And also, it tells me, okay, maybe I'm going to be next. Maybe somebody's going to choose a fight. So it has here useful information, right? And this is a competition. Make no mistake about it. It's not a fight to the death. Sometimes it results in death, right? But it's not a fight to the death. Okay, how do I know that there are rules? And there are rules that make no mistake. Because the moment one person knocks the other one on the ground, and let's say now he's starting to stomp his head into the pavement with his boot, and he's killing them, everybody throws away their phone. They start running around in panic, and people call the police. Or, the moment one pulls out a knife, like, people aren't filming with their phones anymore. The rules have been broken. This isn't a fight anymore. It turned into something very different.
yeah,
And that's where Krav Maga comes in, right? We deal with assault. We don't deal like the stuff that we deal with. You'll see it on CCTV footage. You won't see it almost on mobile phones. Because when the stuff that we deal with happens, people are running for their lives, right? They're not getting out their phones and filming it for YouTube or WorldStar or whatever it is. And so that's to me the difference. That really, when I realized Krav Maga is not fighting. It's assault. It's how to deal with assault. And you know what the beauty of it is? Most legal systems don't recognize fighting, right? There's no such thing as, I know in Canada, you guys on the Commonwealth system, legal
most of
system.
Canada, yeah.
Same thing. Sorry, yeah.
Quebec likes to do its own thing.
Okay, but the same thing I'm familiar with in Israel.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as recognized fighting, right? There's assault. You assaulted me, and I assaulted you back. Both of us broke the law. Nobody cares about who started it, right? Both of us are engaged in something that's considered illegal. So even if you started it, but I punched you back and now I'm fighting with it. Let's say, and I couldn't present that I tried to do everything to escape and I tried to run away and I had no choice but defending myself. But if you pushed me and I pushed you back, that's enough. That's enough, because I had an option to leave. I chose not to. It's not a fight. Don't make any mistake about it. Legally, this is assault. I assaulted you. You assaulted me. But it doesn't matter. If you die, I assaulted you and you died. Not self-defense. I'm going to prison. No question about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think we have something called a thin skull provision. So like say you push me, I push you hard and I'm twice your size and they fall and hit their head, they will make the argument that you used excessive force if they died, right? Because generally it's to stop the threat, to escape, we need to de-escalate as the rule. You can use lethal force in Canada, but you might as well flip a coin because whether you go to jail or not.
I mean, what is lethal? What is lethal force, right? I've heard Krav Maga instructors going, "Well, I don't teach to strike to the throat because that's lethal, and we don't do that to civilians." Excuse me, I'm sorry, but a punch is lethal. I know. Okay, one of the instructors who I've worked with, he had a student, not a very good student, a bit of a. I actually didn't know the guy personally. He punched somebody. That guy fell, knocked his head on the pavement, died.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry, but a punch in the face is lethal. That person ended up in prison, and he belonged there.
Yeah.
Because, if you get involved in a fight and you throw a punch, you're throwing something lethal. That could very much end up in, causing somebody's death. And if you didn't have a very, very good reason why you had to do that in order to protect yourself or to protect your loved ones. So, anything is lethal. You put somebody in a chokehold, you hold on too long, they die. They were a bit bigger than you. You ended up falling with them in a rear naked choke, and you ended up, severing their spine or something like that. So I'm sorry, but conflict is lethal. Violence is lethal, and that's okay if you understand that it's used not in the concepts of fighting, but in the context of dealing with assault. Okay, sport fighting has rules. The rules are all there to protect the fighters. Right? Every single one of the rules, almost. If you look at the UFC, right, the rules over there, pull them out. They're things to avoid injuring one another, right? Because they don't want to see their fighters injured, justifiably so. They got to be able to compete in a lot of fights.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our starting point in Krav Maga. You want to know what's effective in injuring the human body. Pull out the rules of the UFC, and that's a good starting point. That, by the way, is taken from Tim Larkin, who I also had on that was actually the first podcast I ever did. I had Tim Larkin on, and he talks about injuring. That's his go-to. He says, when you're doing self-defense, your number one goal should be to injure the person in front of you, not from a moral perspective. The understanding is that you're doing it because you have no other choice. But if what you're doing, whatever strike you're doing, or whatever you're doing, is not geared for immediate injury, then it's probably not going to end the fight. Then forget about it. For example, I don't do so much low kicks, right? Now, low kicks hurt. They hurt a lot, especially if you're good at them, if you know how to throw a low kick. I'm pretty good with a low kick. I spent my time in Thailand training in the training camps over there, which was a lot of fun. I'd never throw a low kick in a self-defense scenario because I can't guarantee that's going to end the fight right there and there.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily going to injure. It's going to hurt a lot. And maybe with one kick, if I was lucky and landed on the right place and stuff, I can really put somebody in the fight. But that's not guaranteed. I'm training to fight against somebody who's bigger than me. And over there, it might take a good 3 or 4 ones until you really starts hurting. And I certainly don't have the time for that.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. And I see sometimes when I'm watching certain organizations' videos, they're throwing far too many kicks to the head or, roundhouse kicks to the head. I don't see how that's I'll teach low. I don't teach high roundhouse. I teach low, but I'm teaching it, one, to know how to use your body and get good, but also, hey, it's a setup to do something else. You're not going to be using it as a method. Sure, if a guy's never been kicked in the leg and you kick him really hard, the fight's defense or whatever is probably over, but you cannot rely on it.
Maybe they're on ice, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they're on ice and they can't feel anything. Or maybe just their adrenaline is kicking in and they're fighting to survive too. But again, you see how very quickly we gone back. Yeah. You can't avoid it. We've gone back to fighting, haven't we? And me too. You almost can't help it. But as a Krav Maga instructor and somebody's training, you got to keep on putting yourself and remind yourself, this isn't a fight. This isn't 2 guys going at it, throwing at each other low kicks to see who's gonna win the fight. Yeah. It's really not. I can't see myself throwing a low kick against a terrorist coming at me with a knife. I can't see a 19-year-old college student throwing low kicks against somebody who's trying to sexually assault her in a parking lot, right? So forget about low kicks. Not forget about them, but they're not that high up in the skills that I need to be giving to people right now.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Now we were talking about sort of lethal force. Like, so let's take knife stuff for example. You know, you give someone a knife, they always start, I'm gonna knife fight. And I'm like, we're not. We're looking at, as you said, an assault situation. But then I often have to explain, like, if you watch Filipino martial arts, which are great, the way they, I always say, the way they compete and the way they train are completely different things. And then I've been, well, I don't know if it's fortunate. I've bumped into some people who have been in, quote, knife fight to the death, whether it was in a war scenario like Vietnam or wherever. And you ask them, they're often like, I don't really remember, but my knife was in his throat. And when you actually, that life or death situation, it really
But
changes what you're doing as compared
sorry,
to that
Chris,
fight.
I'm going to cut you off again, and
Yeah.
I'm going to hold you again and say again. You said speaking to people who were in knife fights. Now I know exactly what you mean by that. Okay,
Yeah.
There are soldiers in prison. By the way, it's something quite common that gangs will prove who's the better man. They don't just punch each other. They'll actively set a time to meet one another and to knife fight each other. There's certainly part of that knife culture, or in the army where you might be in front of an enemy soldier and it's a knife fight. Okay, we can be excused in saying that, right? Let me put another scenario, right? Um, let's say you're a civilian, right? And you're waiting for a bus stop, and all of a sudden somebody next to you starts, a terrorist next to you pulls out a knife and starts stabbing people. There's no way you'd mistake that and call it a fight, right?
Yeah.
That's
correct.
not a fight. That's an act of terrorism. That's an attack. It's not a fight, right? Two guys going at it in prison with knives, that is a fight, right? So again, we don't deal with, even two soldiers, meeting in a trench, grappling each other, and one of them has a knife. Again, that's kind of borderline, but also goes into fight. What I'm talking about is assault, right? Even a soldier, right? A soldier is on their checkpoint or in their guard post or whatever, and all of a sudden they didn't see. Actually, a situation. I had one of the commanders in a unit that I was working with. They had an alert that somebody breached the perimeter of a residential area nearby. It was in the West Bank, and they came. They did patrols and stuff. They were going around. They didn't see anybody, and they had a lot of forces going out there for quite a while. That's it. They figured it was a false alarm. They closed. Everybody started going. There were less presence of presence in the field, and then out of nowhere, the guy who's been hiding in a bush came, opened the door of the commander, and put the knife into his stomach and started stabbing. The commander jumped on him, grabbed him. They fell down together to the ground. I don't know quite the full, because it wasn't filmed. It was like there was no CCTV. It was quite blurred. They ended up shooting the terrorist with the 5.56 and an M4. It basically hit him in the forehead, and it went around the forehead. He didn't die. All it did was it's one of those freak things that kind of went around his skull, like bounced off his skull and kind of went around, gave him a mohawk. He survived. He was fine. But again, that's not a fight, right? Nobody can call. It wasn't a fight. This was an attack. This was an assault. This is where Krav Maga. This is where Krav Maga lives.
Yeah. So I think I would say then that the word fight is a trigger word for you, and that potentially what you're looking to do is remove it from sort of the vernacular, because it is a loaded word when you say fight. Like I'm saying it out of it's the colloquial way to say the things I'm trying to convey. So potentially what you would like to see is we just stop using the term fight with regards to any self-defense, because then potentially people get confused about what they're doing. Am I correct to sort of say it like that?
In my mind, a fight is, two maybe willing, maybe not so willing participants, engaged on the battlefield, wherever that battlefield can be a car park or whatever, on equal terms or equal grounds. Like they know it's on, they know what they're set up to be. And it's not that doesn't, like, that's really not the realm of of self-defense,
Mm.
right? It can be both ways. It can be either I'm caught by surprise, or maybe also I'm a first responder. Maybe I hear yelling, and I turn around and I see some woman getting stabbed to death, and I might choose to jump in, and like in the London Bridge attacks, by the way, that were a couple of years ago with 3 terrorists with knives, and I might choose to jump in and pull the attacker off of them, and now engage. But again, the mindset is not like, I'm not going to pull them off of them. They recognize me. I recognize them, and off we go. Like, I'm going to run to fight, pick up a brick on my way there and smash them in the head. So there is no fight, right? Or, I might grab them and start attacking them. I'm going to assault them. I'm not going, like, let's be very clear so we don't get sound bites that are out of context. I'm talking about very specific about a situation where you have to save somebody's life, that if you don't intervene now, they're going to get killed. I'm not going in there fighting. I'm going there assaulting with everything I've got, so the fight does not develop, right? And look, I get you. I don't know if it's a trigger word so much. I just think that it's something that we have to be very careful, because naturally we pull in there. I do too. You do. We all naturally kind of go into fight, and we set up the fight like we want it, right? That it's a battle of skills, but that can go very dangerously.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm prying a little bit, but I 100% agree. Like, I'll be like, if you do a technique, you've disengaged, and now you're both standing there with their hands up, I'm like, you're fighting. You should be running, right? So I am on the same page as you. I'm just kind of playing a little and trying to get your idea out of there. Now, because I know you have to go soon, one thing I did want to talk about, because it's sort of a debatable topic in the Krav Maga world, is the matter of ranking. You mentioned belts. I use belts because for a long-term program, I think they're absolutely necessary for the human psyche. Now, like I was talking to Ron Rotem the other week, and he was saying he loves the patches because it's the Israeli culture. And my stance is nobody knows what patches are in North America. It's just confusing. I'm not using them. But a lot of the Israelis are like, I want to use the patches. And then there are the groups of people who say, there's no ranks on the street, forget it. Where's your thoughts on that?
So Ron Rotem is actually a very good friend of mine, and we've had discussion so many times, and we're on opposite sides of this, but I don't think so. I think I've won him over recently. And I've come, so as a kid, we were always training in belts. Krav Maga originally was belts. You look at Imi had a belt, his students had belts. That was the traditional ranking. At some point, and I'm half speculating. It's not completely speculation, but there were certain organizations or people that, and one that I belong to, that wanted kind of a separation. Going, we're not a martial art. We're something completely different. Therefore, we want to distance ourselves from the uniforms, from the belts, from the things. This is, and it's certainly legitimate. And then they started introducing the patches and the ranking systems and whatnot. Okay. I think let's start with, before we talk about belts, patches, all that stuff, let's talk about ranking. I think that ranking has value in terms of splitting up the curriculum, giving people goals. I know where, as an instructor, it's very useful. I know where my students are at. I know that, they've done this in order, let's say, to get to the advanced class. I tested them. I was able to see their knowledge, give them feedback. It really adds structure to where I know that if they're, if they're a blue belt now, I know exactly where they are, where their skill set is, where they need to train towards. And it's also very helpful if I'm visiting a gym that I don't know, or, if the students are, I more or less know where they're at. So it has a very functional reason. Also for the students, for a goal. We need goals to keep on going forward. There's no, pretty much every learning school structure is split up into the ranks. In the army, we have ranks. When you're in school, you're set up into grades. We know that, first grade, they learn math and English at a certain level. That certainly helps. And even when at university, you've got your undergraduates, first year, second year, you've got third year statistics, fourth year statistics, unfortunately, which I had to learn as part of my psychology degree, which is awful. But even if I tell you, okay, I'm learning fourth year statistics, even if you know nothing about statistics, it says something to you. Okay, it also sets expectations, so it's useful as a training tool. Okay, let's start with that. Now, otherwise, it's all chaos. Otherwise, okay, rock up into the class, we say, okay, there are no belts or ranks on the street. So what the hell am I going to teach you? And how do we have some sort of uniformity, right? Because I'm not just an instructor anymore. I run and I teach a lot of instructors around the world, right? How can I make sure that everyone training under the instructors that I certify and that I oversee, how can I make sure that everyone is getting what they need? And it's not just up to, Jim loves teaching guns and Bob, I don't know why I've made all my instructors rednecks, but whatever. Bob loves knife defenses, and Michael, he's got a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so he just teaches them ground stuff. How can I get some uniformity to make sure that everybody's getting not what their instructor feels like teaching on that day, but actually what I, as the person who wrote the syllabus and who's building, understand that it's the due process of developing as a student. So let's start with that. I think you can't teach somebody a skill set that they're going to learn for a few years, if not that, without having structure to it. And the structure is the ranks. Belts or patches, okay? I grew up belts as a kid, then we switched over organization, switched on to patches. So I had patches, and I got used to patches, and I liked patches, and it was good. One day, I was actually in Australia, and I was visited by a guy who's probably 75, and he was an Israeli guy, okay, an Israeli guy in Australia. He rocked up to the gym. I was teaching one day. He wanted to talk to me. I was talking to him. He said, look, I'd like to come and join, see a little bit what you guys do. I used to train Krav Maga. This guy, he was a doctor of sports psychology, very accomplished person. He was actually he taught sports psychology in the Wingate Institute in Israel for a long time. He was the head psychologist for the Sydney Olympic team in the 2000 Olympics, right? And now what he does is he travels the world and he trains billionaire families on game strategy for business.
Yeah. So
this guy was a very smart, accomplished person. And he tells me about the black belt that he got from IMI. At the time, he grew up in Israel. He trained Krav Maga. That's why he came to here. And he got a black belt from IMI. And he's going on, when I got my black belt and my black belt and my black belt and my black belt. And this was 40 years ago, if not that. And he goes, and he keeps on talking about his black belt. And I go, wow, what power does this thing have? Nobody talks about, so for whoever's not familiar, nobody has to explain what a black belt is, but in the patch system, we have practitioner level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, graduate level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have expert levels and master levels. I could not imagine an accomplished 75-year-old with a PhD coming to talking somebody half his age about his graduate 5 or expert level 2 patch that he got from IMI. It doesn't work that way. The belts have power because it's internationally recognized. Everybody knows what a black belt is. Nobody knows what an expert level patch is. Okay. So why, as an instructor, why do I have to invent the wheel, right?
Yeah.
When Krav Maga was young, it made sense. We had to be different. We wanted to show that we were different from others because we weren't a martial art, because we didn't want accidentally anybody to think that we were like judo or anything else. But I think Krav Maga is mature enough now. We can go full circle and we can go, the belt system works. It works in jiu-jitsu phenomenally well. I think Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because so far they've been to a certain extent able to keep the integrity of the belt system. Somebody who's a black belt in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu system is a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like if you get on the mat and roll with them, if you're not if you're not a very, very experienced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, let's say if you're not a brown belt at least, chances are, it doesn't matter what school you come from and what school they come from, they're gonna choke you out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it works. And it works historically in Kung Fu, karate. It did get watered down. Like I remember as a kid in America, I remember some first grade karate black belts walking around. That's bad when that happens. But generally as a system, the belt system works. And the moment we started to bring that into our clubs, at the beginning, everybody was looking like, why are you wearing belts? Who wears belts? And I pull out a photo of Emi and I go, well, Emi wore a belt. Emi never wore a patch. So don't tell me that belts aren't part of Krav Maga.
Yeah.
Let's start with that. But the next thing I saw was that the retention rate in our civilian schools of experienced students went up, ridiculously up, because people wanted to stick around. The belts are visible, the patches are not, right? Yeah. Everybody wants to earn their black belt, right? Everybody who comes into the class and you go, hey, Michael, who started at the same time at me, he's already a purple belt. I'm still at my blue belt. I'm not going to stop training. I'm going to train harder so that I can get my purple belt. At least I'll get there because, I owe it to myself. So competition has power. And at the end of the day, that's all I care about. All I care about is being able to give my students the skill set that they need in order to protect themselves, in order to feel better about themselves, in order to become better, more contributing members of society. And part of that is that they need to show up and they need to come as often as possible to training, and they need to train really, really hard and being focused. And the belt does that. So it works.
Yeah. It's always, because I'm in North America, some people's ideas of how long it, like just from a skill perspective, to actually really be a black belt, they're like, the person who comes in, how long till my black belt? I'm like, I don't know, 8-15 years. How much are you going to train? And they're just like, I want it now. It's no. Even if I know Krav's supposed to be simple, it's just a matter of skill development. You just got to put in the time. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. Occasionally, you get someone, I don't know, it's probably even more confusing in Israel. I'll get someone who's been doing Krav Maga with an organization for a while, or martial arts. I'm like, I want to do the advanced classes. I'm like, no, you got to work your way up the system. I'm like, if you're good enough, I'll cut down the time dramatically. But as you were saying, the belt for me is a milestone marker. I need you to know the basic curriculum that I'm teaching to do the next curriculum because it works off of the basic stuff. And if you come from another organization that does something completely different, you may just be getting confused. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to have to go through that again. I'm like, well, you can stay in the white belt class if you want.
Well, when people come with that attitude, they tend not to last that long anyways. I mean, if somebody comes in, feels, they're entitled to this or that, like, I don't deal with that stuff that much nowadays, but when I, a good 10 years ago, when I was in the trenches, running the basic classes. And by the way, up until this day, I love teaching beginners. Like I like teaching soldiers. I like teaching Krav Maga instructors. I love teaching beginners. And every once in a while, you have somebody who comes in and goes, how can I become an instructor? And I say, well, come tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they look at me and they're like, and I'm like, no, like come to tomorrow's class and we'll take it from there. Like, how do you even know you want to become, like, this is your first class. How do you know that you're that much into it? Like, it's going to take a lot of training and a long, long time, and a lot of sacrifice, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to be able to reach that goal that you've set for yourself. How do you know that you even, that interested and you want to put it in? You got to have a little bit more experience. So just focus on the now.
Yeah, patience, one of the hardest to get human attributes, right?
But yeah, look, I had a student who was so, he said, look, I've been doing Thai boxing for this many years, and I've got a black belt in karate, and like I'm gonna lose patience in the beginners class. I just know that. I know myself, and like there was no talking down this person, and I'm pretty relaxed. Like I'm Israeli, we're pretty relaxed as far as these things go. And I go, look, I don't care. You pay the same tuition fees, beginners and intermediate students. I'm telling you, you'll get what you need in the beginners class. If you want to come into the intermediate class, like I'm telling you, it's not the right thing. But it's your money. came to the intermediate class, got his ass kicked really, really badly. And
Yeah.
our guys are fine. Like we're not out for blood. Like it was just, it's, intermediate training with me. It's hard. It's really hard. And he wasn't up for it. So yeah, he didn't last very long. His ego couldn't take it. His ego couldn't take it. His ego told him he belonged into the advanced classes, but his skill, he couldn't keep up with the pace with the intermediates.
Ego, the other thing.
You got to have humility. You got to have humility to be able to be a good student, even to be able to be a good instructor. The starting point is humility. If your ego is too big, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. So I know you have to go soon. Is there anything that you would like to cover or talk about that we missed? Something you thought was important, Krav Maga or otherwise?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think we did a pretty good job.
That's good. Yeah, no, I love it when the instructors are taking the intellectual approach. I mean, it's very much me, and I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's really important in the complexities of modern society to really integrate that a lot more, because we can't just go around punching people anymore.
No, there's a time and place for everything, right?
Yeah.
If you're coming into one of my schools and this part of the regular evening classes, we're coming there to train. I'm not going to give you a lecture about if it's a 1 hour class, 1.5 minute class, I don't have time to lecture you for 20 minutes about the intricacies of violence. That's what you will get bits and pieces throughout the techniques or not, and then it will make the big picture. But that's exactly why I do, that's why I do these podcasts. That's why I've set up a podcast of my own. I've got the training that we do, Krav Maga Israel, the training camps that we've got people coming in from all over the world. And then we do a deep dive, like in the training camps that I run for civilians. Then we've got people who are absolute beginners to intermediate students, even black belts who come in and we'll do 8 hours a day of training. And over there we really we're living, breathing Krav Maga while we're traveling around Israel, and we really do a deep dive of the techniques and also everything around. We do tactical first aid over there, for example. That really gets, so it's different forms in the day-to-day evening classes. That might not always be the best situation, but in the long-term Krav Maga training camps that I run in Israel on the instructors training program, it's very important for me that the people who train with me and who teach Krav Maga at their own countries, they really have to have a good understanding of violence. So in those situations, that's where we do the deep dives.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. How can people find you online? Because you can put out your new podcast. I'll listen to it as well. So Instagram, right?
That's actually been a lot of fun. Like this podcast, it was just there were a whole bunch of people that I wanted to talk to, just because I wanted to talk to. Like it was
a Jewish
selfish
thing.
It was a selfish pursuit. Okay, there was things that I was really interested in, and some authors that Tim Larkin, author of When Violence is the Answer. I've loved his books. So it was a great excuse to when can you get somebody and just sit down for 2 hours, 3 hours and talk about a topic that really interests you? You got to have a really good excuse. And I found that the podcasts are a brilliant excuse to find people who are really interested and just, on the other side of the planet, and just do like a Zoom call or something like that and just go a deep dive. So I got to talk to Rory Miller.
Nice.
I got to talk to so many interesting people from all walks of life. Tony Blauer, I recently did one, and it's fun because you talk to these people and you kind of build a connection. I've had so much. So this podcast, it's going to be, I've recorded a shit ton of episodes. It's actually going to go live finally next week. So
what's it called, so people know what to look for?
Easy. I wasn't very creative. It's called the Ron Engelman Podcast.
Oh, super easy then.
Maybe I skimped out on sitting down and finding a name, but that's pretty easy. Already have the website set up, ronengelman.com. You can find the Instagram, Krav Maga Israel, a lot of the instructor courses and the training programs. Also not very imaginative, KravMagaIsrael.com. So
Israelis and names. It's like when you look at the Hebrew translations of movie titles, I'm just like, I cannot believe it.
Don't get me started.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on, and I'm sure we'll be in contact, and whenever I can be in Israel, next, which we'll see what happens. I'll certainly drop by.
No problem, Jonathan. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.